Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for listening in. Today, we're going to talk about how much money you should have at age 25. But before we do, as a reminder, this is an educational show and should not be construed as personal financial advice. Full disclosure is available at ototnow.com. Now, let's get started. So, in the last podcast, we talked about the 5 things that financially you should be thinking about in order to make sure that you are on time, on target. So now we're going to go into a series. This is the first of 5 where I'm going to talk about different ages, and I'm going to give you the things that you should be thinking about at that age and things you need to be doing so you can either get or stay on target with your financial goals. So you may not be 25, you may be 45 or 50 listening to this, but this is also some things you can think about as you mentor your children. Because as we all know, financial literacy is not a topic that is taught in depth at all at schools. They are getting more and more exposure with it, but it's not really taught in depth. So a lot of that has to come from the home, like so many other things. So these are some things to think about. Even if you're not 25, you can listen in and maybe you can provide some mentoring to some others on what they need to be doing. So if you remember, we had 5 steps that we had talked about. And the first one is know where you are and the total number of engines. And again, the engines is financial engines that you have going for you. Because, using the airplane analogy. So when you're 25 or you're younger than 25, you are likely to have a whopping one financial engine working for you, and that's your job. So whether you went to college or not, you probably entered the workforce by now and are getting a paycheck. Or maybe you're still maybe in an extended school. If you're becoming a doctor or something that takes us multiple years, you should be getting close to having that paycheck. So that's where you are, is really with the one financial engine working for you. So you have to take that into account. You also may or may not have started yet. And I will tell you, the earlier you start, obviously the better. But at age 25, even if you haven't started yet, you still have plenty of time to get to where you're going. If you think 25 to the standard 65-year-old retirement, that's 40 years. That's your 4 decades of time for you to invest and grow your money. So when you think of those 4 decades and you think of the rule of 72, which I mentioned last time, but I'll go into detail now, is the rule of 72 tells you that the number of years you're invested, if you take 72 and divide it by the return you're getting on your investments, say it's 7.2%, then your money, it tells you how long it'll take for your money to double. So if you get 7.2%, which is a good return, I generally for planning just use 6%, but 7.2%, your money will double every 10 years. So think about that through the lens of let's finish the rule of 72 thought. So if you get 10%, then your money doubles every 7.2 years. So when you think of a traditional stock market heavy aggressive portfolio like the SPY index for the S&P 500 that averages that 10 to 12%, if you can get yourself to stay aggressive, which is not right for everybody, but if you can start early and get yourself to stay aggressive, you can actually outpace that 10% a year, which of course with the rule of 72 you can see how much each little bit makes a difference for you. So if you get 7.2%, your money doubles in 10 years. If you can get 8%, your money would double every 9 years. If you get 9%, your money doubles every 8 years. If you get 10%, your money doubles every 7.2 years. And if you can get above that, you're really making your money work for you. So that's the rule of 72. So let's put it through the lens of the 25-year-old. You're either sitting at 0 or you've got something started. So if you have anything started at this point, it's absolute bonus. Now I will tell my story. I was only child, in Ohio, hit high school, and my parents had kind of continually mentored me that I had one job, and my job was to get good grades. And it wasn't really so you can get a scholarship or, it was more of a, hey, I've always been told that was my job, is to get good grades. And so I was like, okay. And I took that very seriously. I was an only child, so I didn't really have a lot of others to affect my thinking. So it's pretty much my parents telling me what to do, and I had to believe them. So I was like, okay. And I moved around a little bit because my dad was in the Air Force. So, I hit Ohio around the 5th grade level and was just kind of into school. and still am into school. I love learning, but my job was to get good grades. And then somewhere around my junior year, I hit that summer and my parents said, "Hey, you need to get a job." And I kind of said, "Well, now let's talk about that for a second, because you said," and you can just imagine if you have kids, how they bring your own comments back to you. I was like, "You said that my job is to get good grades, and I have done that pretty darn well. And now you're telling me I really have to like go get an actual job?" And they're like, "Yes. And here's why: is whatever you make during your job, we're going to match that amount into an IRA." And I was like, "Okay, that sounds like free money to me," which is a pretty compelling argument to a teenager. Free money. It's like, okay, listening. And I don't really know that I knew what an IRA actually was. And I don't really care, but they just said, "Yeah, we'll do that, and we'll match the money into this account. It'll go into USAA because that's who we had always used at the time." And this is, back several years ago. And they did that. And I also had, like I talked about in another podcast, I had an eighth grade math teacher. He was my teacher for seventh and eighth grade, Mr. Bernarzik, if anybody from the hometown listens, who sold insurance. And he'd also showed me the compound interest chart. So I did actually understand, not necessarily the rule of 72, but I did understand that money put away now could multiply several times over the course of a lifetime. So that was the deal. And if you are in a position to do this for your children as soon as they get out into the workforce, maybe you make a similar deal to where you could provide a little financial incentive, and it's like, "Hey, you earn your money, you spend it, and I'm going to match it into your IRA, and it'll work magic over time." So if you can get started, that's great. But if you can't, here's how, when I talk to youth groups, whether it's middle school or high school, and again, that's about the age my kids are. So when I talk to schools for career days and things, I always put up exactly one chart. And I tell them, if you can, when I talk about being a wealth manager, and I said, if you can understand this one chart, then you will be financially independent during your lifetime, which may be rich, may be wealthy. We talked about those definitions in episode 2 and the difference, and I wouldn't even go into that with kids. But basically, if you want to be financially independent, and of course, they kind of look at me a little bit sideways and say, "Okay, if you want to be rich," right? Because kids understand that, then you need to understand exactly one chart. And if you understand the one chart, you will be rich in your lifetime. And I show them a slide with this chart on it, but basically I'll describe it to you for today. Is if you think of a simple graph chart where the up and down axis, the y-axis is money, and the x-axis, is time, and then draw a line kind of straight up and put that in green and call that income. So whatever it is you choose to do, whatever money you make, it may be a high paying job, it may not. You may start at the minimum wage, but whatever your income is, your expenses, which is the line in red, which is a straight line starting at the 0.00 there, if your expenses stay below your income over the course of your lifetime, you'll be rich. You'll be wealthy beyond your means. Whatever you save and invest over that time, even if you're a terrible investor, even if you only get 6% on your money or 4%, your money's still going to double a few times over during your lifetime. So the importance is start early and make sure that your expenses are less than your income. And that's whether, again, it doesn't matter how much you make. It's just if you keep that in mind. So I take the green line income, red line expenses, and then kind of draw some hashes in between there. And I say that's your wealth. The bigger difference between your income and your expenses, the more wealth you're going to have over your life. Period. Dot. It's that simple. If you could understand that, you are not going to have credit card payments for your whole life, which means you won't be shooting yourself in your foot by having to pay that high interest rate. And again, when people use credit cards, all they're doing is taking future money and spending it now. Well, if you take your future money and spend it now, you aren't going to have that money in the future, and actually have a lot less in the future for two reasons. You're going to pay interest on that money that you borrowed from your future self. So don't piss your future self off by borrowing that money and having to pay interest on it. And the money that you're now using to pay off the stuff, you robbed from your future self is now not compounding and not growing and not in the rule of 72 to where it doubles every so many years. So keep that in mind, that if you can understand that one chart, that is how you become financially independent. So let's get back to our 25-year-old. So when you're at 0, you're born, you're technically broke, you have no dollars, right? And sure, you could be born into a rich family and maybe have an endowment, or, I mean, I'm not going to argue any of that. But for most of us, you start at 0 and broke. And pretty much you go through school. And I will tell you, the habit patterns you develop as a child are your habit patterns for life. Literally, if you have a 12-year-old, give them $100 in 20s, and just give it to them. See what they do with it. If they go put it into their bank in their room, and say, okay, I'll put it with the rest of my cash, and then they go on about their day, you know for sure that you have a child that values money and doesn't need to spend. If you have a child that takes that $100 and immediately wants to start spending, and it's, the whole, when I was a kid, it was burning a hole in your pocket kind of analogy, then they are going to be challenged in their lifetime with that same thought process. And if your 12-year-old spends that $100 as fast as they can, at 25, they're going to buy that new car. You know that. I mean, you know that. So you as parents, do your best, right? No parents are perfect. I'm not saying that they are, because, as parents, we fail all the time, right? But it's like, that is a lesson you need to pass on to them, that, hey, don't spend every dollar that comes in. So over the course of your being broke at 0 to 25, if you still have 0 or you're in debt, well, guess what? You're still broke. So you need to fix it and get on it. And I don't really go into debt a whole lot. That's, go see Dave Ramsey has built an entire lifetime off of getting out of debt, and literally thank God for that, right? Because so many people need that. But once you are free of the debt monster, if you will, then you can really set yourself up for success by having anything saved by 25. So let's think of our 4 decades of investing. So say you have, let's say $10,000 saved at age 25, and you have it invested, and you literally don't touch that money, which there's a lot of things like families and cars and houses and vacation. There's all kinds of things that compete for your money. If you take that $10,000 and you make 7.2%, which is a very achievable rate of return, that $10,000 when you're 35 is going to be $20,000. And then it's going to double again when you're 45. So it's going to be $40,000. It's going to double again by the time you're 55. It's going to be $80,000. And by the time you're 65, it's going to be $160,000. So when you're at 25 and you have that $10,000, if you spend it, you're literally costing your 65-year-old self $160,000. That's insane. So if you just understand that, that will really help you understand that you don't need to spend all your money now, and you don't actually need to save and invest a ton, as long as you start early. And 25 is very achievable. So of course, and if you could save 100,000 by the time you're 25, then you're looking at 1.6 million when you're 65. So when you talk to the folks like in the FIRE movement, which is Financial Independence Retire Early, they get this. This is like their favorite thing in the whole world to talk about. And I love it, because it's up there with my favorite topics too, is if you can start early and invest aggressively and save 35% of your salary, you're going to have all kinds of money fairly early in life and still have the energy to now get out and enjoy it. So just think about that. If you were to get to that 100,000 level, like I said, that'd be 1.6 million. Now, if you get 200,000 by the age of 25 and you're like, okay, that's kind of crazy and not achievable, and I agree with you. I agree with you, unless you get a high-paying job or professional athlete, or maybe an actor or actress, that sort of thing. Maybe you come into money that early, or maybe you get an inheritance that early. You certainly want to sock that away and look how you financially set you're going to be later on. So that's what I want you to think about when you're 25. So this all sets you up for success for what we're going to talk about in the next time. And I will tell you, the next goal for a 25-year-old is to have your annual salary saved by 35. So you are not at your peak entry, you're not your peak earnings at 25 either. So if your annual salary is, say, 40,000, you could probably think that over the course of your lifetime, your annual salary is probably going to go up towards 6 figures. I don't know. It depends on what you do. And a lot of other things. But certainly you step out into an entry position, maybe you're making 40K a year. If you can get to that, whatever your salary is by the time you're 35, you should be able to look back and say, okay, I did the things that got there. You have a decade. So if you think to yourself, 10% of my salary, that would, even at a zero interest rate, a zero rate of return, excuse me, that's going to give you the raw money to put away to have that 1 times annual salary at 35. So, taking down the conceptual of, yes, Steve says I need to have, I need to start now, and the more money I have now is going to multiply 16 times when I'm 65. It's like, I get all that, but literally, what do I need to do today? You need to walk in today to your 401k office, your HR department, or whoever handles it for you, and 10% is the minimum. If you can carve out 10% of your salary, you are going to be fine. I do like to say 15%, because 15% now allows you some leeway later on. And I will tell you, just my own little journey with this is, I stayed single for quite some time. And while I was in the military, I was off flying all over the world. So, not the best life to settle down and get married anyway. So all through my 20s, I was increasing every time I got promoted, which is every couple of years, and you get time in grade raises. And same thing happens in the civilian world. Every time you get a promotion, you kind of take half of that and put that towards savings, and then take the other half and put it towards increasing your quality of life. And if you do that, your savings rate is going to increase very quickly, to the point where you're going to be maxing out your 401k. You're going to be maxing out your IRAs. You're going to have money left over that you're going to want to invest, and you're trying to figure out some way to protect it from taxes. That's going to be a beautiful place to be. I, being a little bit obsessive with, my work and, and savings and investing and things like that, is my goal was to save $100 a day, which obviously is $36,500 a year. And I got to that goal briefly in my late 20s on into my 30s, and then other things started competing for that money. And then I got married and started my family, which is an expensive phase of life. Many of you listening are probably in that phase going, yeah, I hear you. How's that even possible? And I agree, there are challenging times there, but I started early and so aggressively that I was able to actually cut back on my savings and investing. I was still maxing out my 401k and my Roth, but anything beyond that, I was actually just consuming for raising my family. So those are some things to think about with where you should be at 25. What I'll close with is, it's very hard at 25 or even younger. If you're listening to this, you're already way ahead of the curve, but to try to really figure out what it is I want to do with my goals. What am I working towards? You hear young folks, okay, I want to be rich. Well, wow, what an open-ended goal, right? Because that's different for everybody. And what you think when you're 15 or 25 is generally not what you're thinking when you're 65. I don't know. I'm 50, so I'm in the middle of the journey myself. But I will say that, what I was thinking I would do with money and what I'm going to end up doing with money is a little bit different. But you need to think about what your actual goals are. Obviously, if you're in debt, meaning you got out of high school or college and you went into the workforce and you bought that nice new car and maxed out your rent payment so you could impress your friends with where you live, whatever. I mean, you made life decisions, right? But if you are in debt or you're taking credit card debt month to month, that's your immediate goal. No other goals matter. You have to kill that off. Maybe you're trying to save money to buy a house. Well, you need that 20% down. So you have to kind of project. It doesn't happen magically. You have to go, okay, I want a $250,000 house. Well, that's going to be $50,000 down payment. And unless you're good at talking mom and dad out of money, you need to save it yourself. So you might have to save, if you can save $5,000 a year just towards this house, that's going to take you a decade, right? I mean, you're going to make some money along the way in investing, but these things take time. So you really do need to kind of figure out your goals. And even, I used to think about retirement at, even in high school and then on into college. And I was kind of mapping that out. And I kept those calculators, you find them easily online. Even back then you could find, the chart that would tell you if you save this much a month at this age, here's what you're going to have later on. So now that's very easy to get calculated for you. So those are things you can think about now. And the more clear your vision is on where you want to go, then that'll be the easier, that of course enables you to have a decent chance of actually getting there. Okay, so that's all we have for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening in. Please reach out if you have questions through ototnow.com. And thanks again for listening. And here's to you fighting the good fight every day to be on time, on target with your financial goals.